She stood at the end of the line, just another civilian contractor in faded cargo pants and a worn tactical vest, watching as military personnel boarded the transport aircraft with practiced efficiency. No rank insignia, no official documentation, just a weathered ID badge that read consultant, clearance pending. When her turn came, the general took one look at her paperwork and shook his head dismissively. Not today, miss. This is a classified military operation, not a sightseeing tour. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just stepped aside quietly as the aircraft prepared for departure. Then a secure phone rang in the command tent. The Secretary of Defense himself was on the line, and when he spoke a single code name into the silence, every officer in earshot snapped to attention, because sometimes the most dangerous operators don't wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear silence. Welcome to those who left a trace. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden identity and unimaginable courage, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today? And if you believe that true warriors come in many forms, hit that subscribe button to help us share these powerful stories of service and sacrifice that deserve to be remembered. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Rhino in Afghanistan's Helmand province. The air was already thick with dust and the promise of another scorching day, but the activity around the helicopter landing zone suggested urgency that transcended comfort. A convoy of Black Hawks sat in perfect formation, rotors slowly spinning as ground crews completed final checks and loadouts. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb stood at the operations tent reviewing the passenger manifest for what intelligence had designated Operation Silent Thunder. Classified at the highest levels, the mission involved extraction of a high-value intelligence asset from deep within Taliban-controlled territory. Every seat on the aircraft had been allocated weeks in advance. Every passenger vetted through multiple security clearances. Every piece of equipment accounted for down to the last round of ammunition. The mission roster read like a who's who of elite military units. Delta Force operators with faces that belonged in shadows. CIA operatives whose real names existed only in classified files. And military intelligence specialists whose expertise in interrogation and psychological warfare was legendary. These were men and women who had spent years earning their place at tables where life and death decisions were made with clinical precision. At precisely 0800 hours, personnel began arriving at the staging area for final equipment checks and mission briefing. They moved with the fluid efficiency of professionals who had done this countless times before, their gear organized with obsessive attention to detail, their weapons maintained to perfection. Conversations were minimal and focused, each word carrying the weight of operational security. Webb had been running high-risk extractions for 8 years, ever since his promotion to field command following a decorated career in special operations. He prided himself on maintaining strict protocols, ensuring that every mission proceeded according to established procedures. In his experience, deviation from standard operating procedures led to compromised operations, wounded soldiers, and failed objectives. As he reviewed the final passenger list one more time, Webb noticed something that hadn't been there during his previous briefings. At the bottom of the manifest, written in different handwriting, was a single entry that made him frown. Alexander Chun, civilian contractor, clearance level, pending. No agency designation, no specific role, no commanding officer signature approving her inclusion. Webb had dealt with civilian contractors before, usually former military personnel working for defense companies or intelligence agencies. They typically arrive with extensive documentation, clear mission parameters, and official authorization from multiple sources. This entry looked like an afterthought, hastily added without proper verification. He was still examining the manifest when movement at the perimeter caught his attention. A figure approached the staging area on foot, moving with deliberate purpose, but without the hurried efficiency of military personnel running behind schedule. As the person drew closer, Webb realized it was a woman in her early 30s, wearing civilian clothes that looked more appropriate for a hiking trip than a combat operation. She carried no visible weapons, no tactical gear, just a simple backpack, and what appeared to be a standard contractor's identification badge hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Her clothes were practical but unremarkable, desert-colored cargo pants, and a long-sleeved shirt that had seen better days. Her boots were military issue but worn, suggesting long use rather than recent purchase. What struck Webb most was her demeanor. While everyone else in the staging area moved with a controlled tension of personnel preparing for combat, she seemed almost relaxed, as if walking into a war zone was as routine as catching a bus to work. Her eyes scanned the area with professional interest, but without the hypervigilance that characterized trained military operators. As she approached the manifest checkpoint, Webb intercepted her. "Excuse me, miss. Are you Alexander Chun?" She turned toward him, and for the first time, Webb got a clear look at her face. Asian features, shoulder-length black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No makeup or jewelry. Her eyes were dark and intelligent, holding a calmness that seemed incongruous with the situation surrounding them. "That's correct," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Webb couldn't immediately place. "I believe I'm on your passenger list." Webb consulted his clipboard, noting the discrepancies he'd observed earlier. "Ms. Chun, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Webb, Mission Commander. I'm afraid there seems to be some confusion about your authorization. Your clearance is listed as pending, and I don't have any official documentation regarding your participation in this operation." She reached into her backpack and produced a single sheet of paper, folded and slightly worn. "This should clarify things," she said, handing it to Webb. The document was brief, consisting of 3 paragraphs of text and several official seals. Webb read it quickly, his frown deepening with each line. The authorization came from the Department of Defense, but the specific agency was redacted. Her role was described simply as operational consultant, with no additional details about her expertise or mission parameters. Most troubling was the security clearance designation. Instead of the standard codes Webb was familiar with, her clearance was listed simply as Executive Override. He had never seen that designation before, and the implications made him uncomfortable. Someone with significant authority had personally authorized her inclusion, bypassing normal channels entirely. "Ms. Chun," Webb said carefully, "this authorization is highly irregular. I'm not comfortable including civilian personnel without proper briefing and verification through established channels." She nodded, as if she had expected this response. "I understand your concern, Colonel. Perhaps you should contact your superior officer for clarification." Webb considered his options. The mission launch was scheduled for 0830, leaving limited time for extensive verification procedures. However, his responsibility for the safety and success of the operation demanded that he resolve any uncertainty about personnel authorization. "I'll need to verify this with higher command," he said. "Please wait here while I make some calls." She stepped aside without argument, finding a position near the equipment pallets where she could observe the ongoing preparations without interfering. Webb noticed that several of the operators had taken note of her presence, their professional curiosity evident in the way they assessed her from a distance. Webb returned to the command tent and reached for secure communication equipment. His first call was to his immediate superior, Colonel Patricia Hayes at Central Command. The conversation was brief and unsatisfying. "Hayes here. Ma'am, this is Webb at Rhino. I have a question about personnel authorization for Silent Thunder." "Go ahead." "I have a civilian contractor listed on my manifest with executive override clearance. Alexandra Chun. Can you verify her authorization?" There was a pause, longer than Webb expected. When Hayes spoke again, her voice carried a different tone. "Webb, that authorization came from well above my level. If it's on your manifest, It's been approved by someone with authority. I don't question. Webb felt his unease increase. Ma'am, I don't have any mission briefing information for this individual. I don't know what her role is supposed to be or what capabilities she brings to the operation. Colonel, Hayes said firmly, sometimes operational compartmentalization means that certain information is provided on a need-to-know basis. Your need-to-know extends to getting her safely to the objective and back. Beyond that, her activities fall under separate command authority. The implication was clear. Webb was being told to include Chun in his mission without full knowledge of her purpose or authority. In his 8 years of command experience, he had never encountered such a situation. Understood, ma'am, Webb said, though his tone conveyed his continued concern. Webb, let me be clear about something. That woman's presence on your aircraft is not optional. It's not subject to your approval or disapproval. It's a direct requirement from the highest levels of command. Do we understand each other? Yes, ma'am. Crystal clear. The conversation ended, leaving Webb with more questions and answers. He returned to the staging area to find Chun exactly where he had left her, seemingly unbothered by the delay or the hostile glances she was receiving from some of the military personnel. Miss Chun, Webb said, approaching her with reluctant acceptance. You're cleared for the mission. However, I need to establish some ground rules. She turned toward him with polite attention, waiting for him to continue. First, you'll be seated in the rear of the aircraft, away from operational personnel. Second, you'll remain with the aircraft crew during the extraction, not with the ground team. Third, you'll follow all instructions from military personnel, without question or delay. Are we clear? Perfectly clear, Colonel, she replied. I have no intention of interfering with your operations. Webb nodded, though he remained unconvinced. The aircraft departs in 15 minutes. I suggest you complete any final preparations now. As Chun walked toward the aircraft, Webb noticed something he had missed earlier. Despite her civilian appearance and seemingly casual attitude, she moved with a fluid efficiency that suggested extensive physical training. Her posture was perfect, her stride measured and controlled, her awareness of her surroundings comprehensive but subtle. The other passengers had already begun boarding when she approached the aircraft. Webb watched from a distance as she fell in line behind the last of the military personnel, maintaining appropriate spacing and following boarding protocols without instruction. Whatever her background, she clearly understood military procedures. The aircraft commander, Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez, stood at the base of the loading ramp checking off passengers as they boarded. When Chin reached him, he consulted his manifest with obvious confusion. Ma'am, I don't have any briefing information for civilian contractors on this flight, Rodriguez said. Can you provide me with your specific seating assignment? Before Chin could respond, Webb approached. Chief, Miss Chun is authorized for transport. Assign her to seat 18 Alpha, rear section. Rodriguez nodded but maintained his professional skepticism. Ma'am, you'll need to store any personal items in the overhead compartments. All loose gear must be secured for tactical maneuvering. Chun complied without question, stowing her backpack and taking her assigned seat. Webb noticed that she strapped herself in with the efficiency of someone familiar with military aircraft, adjusting her safety harness and positioning herself with a flight profile ahead. As the aircraft prepared for departure, Webb conducted his final pre-flight briefing. He outlined mission parameters, extraction timeline, and emergency procedures for all personnel. When he mentioned that they would be operating in disputed territory with potential hostile contact, Chen's expression didn't change at all. She listened with the same calm attention she had displayed throughout the morning. The helicopter engines spun up with their characteristic whine, building to operational power. Webb took his position near the aircraft commander's station, where he could monitor communications and coordinate with the flight crew. As they lifted off from FOB Rhino, he found himself glancing back at Chin periodically, trying to understand what role she could possibly play in a high-risk military operation. The flight to the objective area would take approximately 45 minutes, following a route designed to avoid known enemy positions and radar installations. Webb used the time to review his mission plans one final time, but part of his attention remained focused on the mysterious contractor who had been forced into his operation by authorities he couldn't even identify. 20 minutes into the flight, the aircraft's communication system crackled with an incoming priority message. The radio operator handed Webb a headset, indicating that the transmission was for him personally. Thunder Actual, this is Overwatch. Priority traffic for Mission Commander. Webb recognized the call sign as belonging to the Joint Operations Center responsible for monitoring their mission. Overwatch, this is Thunder Actual. Go ahead. Thunder Actual, be advised that operational parameters have been modified upon reaching the objective. Civilian Contractor Chin is authorized to separate from the aircraft and conduct independent activities. She is not, repeat not, to be restricted to the aircraft. Webb's jaw tightened. This represented a complete reversal of the instructions he had been given earlier. Overwatch, can you clarify the nature of these independent activities? Negative, Thunder Actual. That information is compartmentalized. Your mission remains unchanged. Chen's activities are separate and do not affect your operational responsibilities. Webb glanced back at Chun, who appeared to be resting with her eyes closed. If she had heard the radio transmission, she gave no indication of it. Overwatch, I need clarification on my authority regarding civilian contractor safety and security. Thunder Actual, once Contractor Chin leaves her aircraft, she falls under separate command authority. Your responsibility for her welfare ends at that point. The implications were staggering. Webb was being told that Chin would be operating independently in hostile territory, with no backup, no support, and no oversight from his unit. Whatever her mission, it was considered important enough to justify extraordinary risks. As they approached the objective area, Webb could see the landscape below transition from relatively secure territory to the disputed regions where Taliban activity was frequent and unpredictable. The extraction site was located in a valley surrounded by hills that provided excellent concealment for enemy forces. Intelligence reports indicated that the area had been quiet for the past week, but in Afghanistan, that could change without warning. The aircraft commander announced their approach to the landing zone, and Webb prepared his team for rapid deployment. The extraction of their intelligence asset was scheduled to take no more than 10 minutes on the ground, minimizing their exposure to potential enemy action. As they settled into their landing approach, Webb made one final attempt to understand Chen's role in the operation. Ms. Chun, he said, moving to the seat beside her, I've been informed that you'll be conducting separate activities once we're on the ground. I'd like to know what kind of support you might need from my team. She opened her eyes and looked at him directly. For the first time, Webb saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not fear or uncertainty, but kind of focused intensity that reminded him of his most experienced operators preparing for combat. Colonel Webb, she said quietly, I appreciate your concern for my welfare, but I can assure you that I have everything I need to complete my mission safely. What exactly is your mission? Webb asked. She was quiet for a moment, considering her response. I'm going to recover something that was lost. Something that needs to come home. Before Webb could ask for clarification, the aircraft touched down in a swirl of dust and noise. The rear ramp lowered, and Webb's team began their rapid deployment to secure the landing zone and locate their primary objective. Chun unbuckled her harness and stood, shouldering her backpack with practiced efficiency. As she moved toward the ramp, Webb caught her arm gently. Ms. Chun, whatever you're planning to do out there, please be careful. This is hostile territory. She smiled for the first time since he'd met her, expression that somehow managed to be both reassuring and enigmatic. Colonel, I've been operating in hostile territory for most of my adult life. This is just another day at work. As she walked down the ramp and disappeared into the Afghan landscape, Webb had the unsettling feeling that he'd just witnessed something significant, though he couldn't define exactly what it was. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered anyone quite like Alexander Chin. The extraction of their intelligence asset proceeded according to plan, but Webb found himself repeatedly scanning the surrounding terrain, wondering what Chen was doing and whether she was safe. His questions would remain unanswered for several hours, until communication from the highest levels of government would fundamentally change his understanding of what had just occurred. The intelligence asset they had come to extract was exactly where intelligence reports had indicated he would be. Staff Sergeant Michael Torres had been operating undercover in the region for 3 months, gathering information about Taliban supply routes and command structures. His extraction had been scheduled after reports suggested that his cover might have been compromised. That Webb's team located Torres at a predetermined rendezvous point approximately 1 kilometer from the landing zone. He appeared to be in good health despite his extended isolation, and his intelligence briefing confirmed that he had obtained valuable information about enemy operations in the region. Torres, Webb said as they began their movement back to the aircraft, "Did you encounter any other American personnel during your time here? Any contractors or intelligence operatives?" Torres looked puzzled by the question. "No, sir. I haven't seen any Americans except for locals who might be working with our forces." "Why do you ask?" Webb decided not to elaborate. "Just checking on operational security. Let's get you home." The movement back to the landing zone proceeded without incident, but Webb found himself constantly aware of Chen's absence. She had departed the aircraft with nothing more than a backpack and what appeared to be complete confidence in her ability to survive in hostile territory. The more he considered her behavior and demeanor, the more questions arose about her true identity and capabilities. As they approached the aircraft, Webb's radio crackled with an incoming transmission from the Joint Operations Center. "Thunder Actual, this is Overwatch. What is your status?" "Overwatch, Thunder Actual. Package secured. Returning to aircraft now. ETA to your location in 5 minutes." "Thunder Actual. Be advised that you are to wait at the landing zone for Contractor Chen's return. Do not depart without her." Webb checked his watch. They had been on the ground for nearly an hour, and Chun had been operating independently for most of that time. In a region where enemy forces could mobilize quickly, extended ground time represented significant risk for his entire team. "Overwatch, how long should we expect to wait for Contractor return?" "Unknown at this time. Thunder Actual. You are authorized to hold position until Contractor return or further orders." Webb's unease continued to grow. Holding position in potentially hostile territory while waiting for a civilian contractor to complete an undefined mission violated every principle of risk management he had learned in his military career. However, his orders were clear, and the authority behind them was unquestionable. 20 minutes later, Webb was beginning to seriously consider the possibility that Sean had been captured or killed when movement caught his attention on the ridgeline approximately 500 meters from their position. A single figure was moving toward them with the steady pace of someone navigating familiar terrain. As the figure drew closer, Webb confirmed through binoculars that it was indeed Chun. She appeared to be uninjured and moving under her own power, but something about her posture suggested that her mission had been more demanding than her casual demeanor had indicated. When she reached the aircraft, Webb noted several changes from her earlier appearance. Her clothes were dustier and showed signs of movement through rough terrain. Her boots had collected the red clay that characterized the region's geology. Most significantly, she was no longer carrying just her backpack. She now had a small, wrapped bundle secured to her equipment. "Ms. Chun," Webb said as she approached the aircraft, "I'm glad to see you're safe. Did you complete your mission successfully?" She looked at him with an expression that seemed to contain layers of meaning he couldn't decipher. "Yes, Colonel. I found what I was looking for." Webb wanted to ask more questions, but something in her demeanor discouraged further inquiry. She had clearly accomplished whatever she'd come to do, and her return marked the completion of their extended ground time. "All right, people, let's get airborne," Webb announced. Mission complete. As the aircraft lifted off and began its return flight to FOB Rhino, Webb found himself studying Chim more carefully. She had resumed her seat in the rear section and appeared to be resting, but her hands remained protectively positioned near the bundle she had brought back from her independent mission. Whatever she had recovered, It was clearly important enough to justify the extraordinary risks and irregular procedures that had characterized her participation in the operation. Webb suspected that he would never know the full story of what had occurred, but his professional curiosity remained intense. The return flight passed without incident, and they touched down at FOB Rhino as the sun was beginning to set over the Afghan landscape. As personnel began disembarking, Webb approached Chun one final time. "Ms. Chun, I want you to know that despite my initial concerns, I'm impressed by your professionalism and competence. If you ever need support for future operations, I hope you'll consider requesting my unit." She smiled, the same enigmatic expression he had seen earlier. "Colonel Webb, you run an excellent operation. Your team's professionalism made my mission possible." As she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave the aircraft, Webb noticed something that made him reconsider everything he thought he understood about Alexander Chun. When she reached for her bundle, her sleeve rolled up slightly, revealing a small tattoo on her wrist. It was partially obscured and faded, but Webb recognized the design immediately. It was the insignia of the CIA's Special Activities Division, the agency's most classified operational unit. The implications hit Webb like a physical blow. Chun wasn't just a civilian contractor with mysterious authorization. She was likely a deep cover operative with one of the most secretive and capable organizations in the American intelligence community. Her casual demeanor and apparent lack of tactical preparation had been carefully constructed cover, designed to deflect exactly the kind of scrutiny Webb had been applying. As Chun walked away from the aircraft and disappeared into the base's administrative areas, Webb realized that he had been witness to something far more significant than a simple personnel extraction. Whatever Chun had recovered during her independent mission, it had been important enough to justify deploying one of America's most valuable and secretive assets. That evening, as Webb completed his after-action reports and debriefing procedures, he found himself struggling with how to document Chen's participation in the operation. The official record would show that she had been transported to and from the objective area as a civilian contractor, with no mention of her independent activities or possible intelligence affiliation. It wasn't until 3 days later that Webb would understand the true significance of what he had witnessed. A priority message arrived at his headquarters, originating from the highest levels of the Department of Defense. The message was brief but stunning in its implications. Classification: top secret. Executive access only. Subject: Operation Silent Thunder. Supplemental information. Contractor A. Chen's independent activities resulted in the recovery of remains and personal effects of Captain Jennifer Hayes, USA, Kiev 15 months ago during classified operations. Family notification and repatriation proceedings will commence immediately. Captain Hayes' sacrifice in Contractor Chen's recovery operation reflect the highest traditions of American service. This information is compartmentalized and not for general distribution. Webb read the message 3 times before its full meaning sank in. Chen had not been conducting intelligence gathering or strategic reconnaissance. She had been on a recovery mission, retrieving the remains of a fallen soldier who had been listed as missing in action for more than a year. The extraordinary authorization, irregular procedures, and highest level support suddenly made perfect sense. Chen had risked her life to ensure that an American soldier could finally come home, that a family could have closure, and that a promise made to those who serve would be honored. In all his years of military service, Webb had never encountered such dedication to the principle that no one gets left behind. The quiet woman who had appeared so out of place among his elite operators had been conducting one of the most sacred missions in military culture, bringing home the fallen. As Webb filed his classified addendum to the mission report, he found himself hoping that he would have the opportunity to work with Alexander Chen again. Whatever her true identity and organizational affiliation, she represented the kind of commitment and competence that made dangerous missions successful and honored the sacrifice of those who didn't make it home. The formal records of Operation Silent Thunder would forever show it as a successful intelligence extraction. But for Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, it would always be remembered as the day he learned that heroes sometimes come in the most unexpected forms, carrying out the most sacred missions with quiet dignity and unshakable resolve. 3 weeks later, Webb received an invitation to attend a private ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. Captain Jennifer Hayes was finally being laid to rest with full military honors, her remains having been recovered from a remote Afghan valley by an operative whose name would never appear in any public record. As Webb stood among the honored guard and watched Hayes' family receive the folded flag, he caught sight of a familiar figure standing alone at the back of the gathering. Alexander Chun, wearing civilian clothes and maintaining the same low profile that had characterized their first meeting, was paying her silent respects to a fellow soldier she had risked everything to bring home. Their eyes met briefly across the cemetery, and she offered the slightest nod of acknowledgement before turning and walking away. Webb never saw her again, but he carried the memory of her service for the rest of his military career, a reminder that the most important missions are sometimes carried out by people whose names will never be known and whose sacrifices will never be publicly acknowledged. 6 months after Operation Silent Thunder, Lieutenant Colonel Webb found himself back at Forward Operating Base Rhino, preparing for another high-risk mission deep in Taliban-controlled territory. The operational parameters were similar to those he had managed dozens of times before, but the memory of his encounter with Alexander Chin had fundamentally changed his perspective on the nature of military service and sacrifice. As he reviewed the personnel manifest for the new operation, designated Crosswind Recovery, Webb noticed something that made him pause. At the bottom of the list, in the same handwritten style he remembered from months earlier, was a familiar entry: Sarah Mitchell, civilian contractor, clearance level, executive override. Webb's pulse quickened as he considered the implications. The authorization pattern was identical to what he had seen with Chun, suggesting that another deep cover operative was being integrated into his mission through the same irregular channels. This time, however, Webb was prepared for the possibility that his understanding of the mission parameters might be incomplete. The staging area at 0800 hours presented a scene nearly identical to his previous experience. Elite military personnel moved through their pre-mission preparations with professional efficiency, while Webb scanned the perimeter for signs of his mysterious contractor. She appeared exactly on schedule, walking toward the aircraft with the same measured pace that had characterized Chen's approach. Sarah Mitchell appeared to be in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a functional ponytail and the same nondescript civilian clothing that seemed to be standard for these particular contractors. Like Chun, she carried minimal equipment and moved with subtle confidence that suggested extensive training despite her unremarkable appearance. "Ms. Mitchell," Webb said, intercepting her at the manifest checkpoint, "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Webb, Mission Commander. I understand you'll be joining us today." She looked at him directly, her blue eyes holding the same calm intelligence he had observed in Chun. "That's correct, Colonel. I believe my authorization is in order." Webb consulted his clipboard, finding the same type of sparse documentation that had accompanied Chen's mission. "Ms. Mitchell, based on previous experience with similar authorizations, I suspect you'll be conducting independent activities once we reach the objective area. Is that correct?" Her expression shifted slightly, suggesting surprise at his directness. "You've worked with contractors like me before?" "Once," Webb replied. "It was educational." She nodded, understanding the implications. "Then you know that my mission parameters are compartmentalized. But I can assure you that my activities won't interfere with your operational objectives." Webb felt a sense of déjà vu as he led Mitchell through the same briefing process he had used with Chun. However, this time he was prepared for the possibility that official communications would modify her status during the flight, and he was mentally ready to support her independent operations without full knowledge of their purpose. The flight to the objective area proceeded normally until they were 20 minutes from their destination. As Webb had anticipated, the aircraft's communication system activated with a priority transmission from the Joint Operations Center. "Crosswind Actual, this is Overwatch. Priority modification to operational parameters." Webb accepted the headset from his communications operator. "Overwatch, this is Crosswind Actual. Go ahead." "Crosswind Actual, be advised that civilian contractor Mitchell is authorized for independent ground operations upon reaching the objective. She is not restricted to the aircraft and will coordinate her own extraction." Webb glanced at Mitchell, who was listening to the transmission through her own headset. Unlike Chun, who had appeared to rest during the flight, Mitchell was clearly monitoring all communications related to the mission. Overwatch, understood. Contractor Mitchell authorized for independent ops. What is the nature of her extraction coordination? Crosswind actual. Contractor extraction will be coordinated through separate channels. Your mission timeline remains unchanged. As they approached the landing zone, Webb found himself curious about the differences between Mitchell and Chun. While Chun had maintained her civilian contractor cover until the very end, Mitchell seemed more willing to acknowledge the reality of her situation. Colonel Webb, Mitchell said as they prepared for landing, I want you to know that I have extensive experience operating in this type of environment. You don't need to be concerned about my safety or capabilities. Webb nodded, though his professional instincts still demanded that he understand the nature of her mission. Ms. Mitchell, can you give me any indication of what you'll be doing out there? Even general parameters would help me coordinate support if needed. She considered his request for a moment, then leaned closer to speak privately. Colonel, I'm going to be conducting a personnel recovery operation. Someone who's been missing for a long time. Someone who deserves to come home. Webb's understanding crystallized immediately. Like Chun, Mitchell was conducting a recovery mission for fallen American personnel. The pattern suggested that there was an entire program dedicated to locating and retrieving American remains from hostile territory, using deep cover operatives with extraordinary clearances and capabilities. How many of these missions are there? Webb asked quietly. Mitchell's expression grew somber. Too many, Colonel. Far too many. As the aircraft touched down in the same valley where Webb had supported Chen's mission months earlier, he realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his military experience. The dedication of resources and personnel to recovery operations suggested commitment to the principle of leaving no one behind that exceeded anything he had previously understood. Mitchell's departure from the aircraft was even more confident than Chen's had been. She moved with the fluid precision of someone who had conducted similar operations many times before, disappearing into the Afghan landscape with such efficiency that Webb lost sight of her within minutes. The primary mission proceeded according to plan. Webb's team successfully extracted their designated intelligence asset, a Navy SEAL who had been operating undercover for 2 months gathering information about enemy weapons caches. The operation was textbook perfect, completed in under 30 minutes with no hostile contact. However, unlike the previous mission, Mitchell's return was delayed significantly longer. Webb found himself holding position at the landing zone for more than 2 hours, during which time he received periodic updates from the Joint Operations Center indicating that her mission was proceeding but required additional time. When Mitchell finally returned, the differences from Chen's mission became immediately apparent. Mitchell was not alone. She was accompanied by 2 additional figures, both moving slowly and requiring assistance. As they approached the aircraft, Webb realized that Mitchell had recovered not just remains, but living personnel who had been missing and presumed dead. Jesus Christ, Webb muttered, watching through binoculars as Mitchell helped 2 emaciated figures toward the aircraft. She found survivors. The reunion at the aircraft was unlike anything Webb had witnessed in his military career. The 2 recovered personnel were American soldiers who had been listed as missing in action for more than 18 months. They were severely malnourished and showed signs of extended captivity, but they were alive and conscious. Mitchell coordinated their medical evacuation with the same quiet competence she had displayed throughout the operation. She worked alongside Webb's medics to stabilize the recovered soldiers for transport, demonstrating medical training that exceeded anything a typical civilian contractor would possess. Ms. Mitchell, Webb said as they prepared for departure, what you've accomplished today, I don't even know how to categorize it. She looked at him with exhaustion evident in her features, but satisfaction in her expression. Colonel, these men have been held in a cave complex 15 kilometers from here for over a year. Intelligence suggested they were dead, but local sources indicated otherwise. Sometimes you have to verify in person. The return flight was dominated by medical procedures as Webb's team worked to stabilize the recovered soldiers. Mitchell assisted throughout the flight, demonstrating skills in trauma medicine, psychological counseling, and languages that painted a picture of training far more extensive than any civilian contractor program could provide. As they approached FOB Rhino, Webb's radio activated with another priority transmission from the Joint Operations Center. Crosswind Actual, this is Overwatch. Be advised that recovering personnel require immediate transfer to Landstuhl Medical Center in Germany. Medical evacuation aircraft will be standing by upon your arrival. The coordination was flawless. Within minutes of touching down at FOB Rhino, the recovered soldiers were transferred to a medical evacuation aircraft staff with specialists prepared for their specific medical and psychological needs. Mitchell coordinated the transfer with the same professional competence that had characterized every aspect of her mission. As the medical evacuation aircraft departed for Germany, Mitchell approached Webb for what he assumed would be their final conversation. "Colonel Webb, I want to thank you for your flexibility and support. Missions like this are only possible because of commanders who understand that sometimes the parameters change during execution." Webb studied her face, seeing exhaustion but also deep satisfaction. "Ms. Mitchell, I have to ask, how many people like you are out there, conducting these kind of operations?" She smiled, the first genuine expression of emotion he had seen from her. "Colonel, there are dozens of American personnel still missing throughout Afghanistan, Iraq, and other operational areas. Every one of them deserves the same chance to come home that we gave those 2 soldiers today. And you're part of some kind of specialized recovery program?" Mitchell's expression grew more guarded. "Colonel, I'm part of a commitment that was made to every person who wears a uniform. A promise that no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, we'll never stop looking for our people." As Mitchell gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, Webb realized that he had been privileged to witness something extraordinary. The recovery of living American personnel from extended captivity represented one of the most successful rescue operations in recent military history, conducted by an operative whose identity and affiliation would remain classified indefinitely. 3 days later, Webb received a secure communication from the Department of Defense containing information that fundamentally changed his understanding of what he had witnessed. Classification: Top Secret Compartmented Access. Subject: Operation Crosswind Recovery Mission Outcome. Contractor S. Mitchell's recovery operation resulted in the successful rescue of Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez and Specialist Michael Thompson, both previously listed as missing in action. Medical evaluation indicates both personnel are expected to make full recoveries following extended rehabilitation. This operation represents the successful conclusion of an 18-month search and rescue effort involving multiple agencies and extraordinary operational risk. Contractor Mitchell's actions reflect the highest standard of courage and competence in service to American personnel recovery objectives. Webb saved the communication to his classified files, understanding that he had been witness to something that would never be publicly acknowledged, but would forever change the lives of 2 American soldiers and their families. Several weeks later, Webb learned through unofficial channels that both recovered soldiers had been reunited with their families and were making significant progress in their physical and psychological rehabilitation. The official records would show them as having been rescued through routine intelligence operations, with no mention of the extraordinary risks taken by contractors like Sarah Mitchell. But for Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb, the memory of Mitchell's quiet competence and unwavering dedication would serve as a permanent reminder that the most important military operations are sometimes conducted by people whose names will never appear in history books, but whose actions honor the deepest commitments of American military service. 1 year after his encounters with Alexander Chun and Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Webb received an assignment that would fundamentally change his understanding of the American military's commitment to personnel recovery. He was selected to command a new joint task force dedicated exclusively to locating and recovering missing American personnel from hostile territories around the world. 1 year after his encounters with Alexander Chun and Sarah Mitchell, Lieutenant Colonel Webb received an assignment that would fundamentally change his understanding of the American military's commitment to personnel recovery. He was elected to command a new joint task force dedicated exclusively to locating and recovering missing American personnel from hostile territories around the world. The briefing for his new assignment took place in a secure facility outside Washington, D.C., far from the operational theaters where he had spent most of his career. The conference room was filled with representatives from every major intelligence agency and military service, suggesting that his new command would have resources and authorities unlike anything he had previously experienced. General Patricia Hawkins, now Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, conducted the briefing personally. Webb recognized her from his previous encounters with classified operations, though they had never worked together directly. "Colonel Webb," General Hawkins began, "your selection for this assignment is based on your demonstrated competence in managing complex operations involving personnel with extraordinary clearances and capabilities. Your previous experience with contractors Chun and Mitchell has prepared you uniquely for what we're about to discuss." Webb felt a mixture of curiosity and apprehension as Hawkins activated a secure presentation system and began displaying information that exceeded his previous security clearances. "The personnel you encountered during Operation Silent Thunder and Crosswind Recovery are part of a program designated Guardian Angel," Hawkins continued. "This program has been operational for 8 years and currently maintains 43 active recovery specialists deployed worldwide." The scope of the operation was breathtaking. Webb learned that Guardian Angel operatives were conducting recovery missions in 17 different countries, often spending months or years establishing cover identities and gathering intelligence about missing American personnel. "Colonel Webb," Hawkins said, "we're offering you command of Guardian Angel operations. This means you would be responsible for coordinating recovery missions involving some of the most capable and dedicated operatives in American service." The presentation continued for 2 hours, during which Webb learned details about recovery operations that had successfully returned more than 200 missing American personnel over the previous 8 years. Some had been prisoners of war. Others had been lost due to aircraft crashes or equipment failures in remote areas. And still others had been captured during classified operations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. "General," Webb said during a break in the briefing, "the level of risk these operatives accept appears to be extraordinary. What kind of training and support do they receive?" Hawkins smiled grimly. "Colonel, Guardian Angel operatives are recruited from the most elite units in American military and intelligence services. They undergo 2 years of specialized training in survival, language, medicine, psychology, and deep cover operations. Most importantly, they're volunteers who understand that their missions may require them to operate without backup for extended periods." Webb began to understand the magnitude of what he was being offered. Command of Guardian Angel would mean responsibility for operatives whose individual capabilities exceeded those of entire special operations teams, conducting missions in the most dangerous environments on Earth. "What happened to my predecessor?" Webb asked. Hawkins' expression grew somber. "Colonel Sarah Martinez completed 5 years of Guardian Angel command before requesting reassignment to conventional operations. The psychological demands of coordinating high-risk recovery missions proved to be more challenging than combat command." Webb understood the implication. Managing operations where American lives depended on the success of individual operatives operating without support would create stress levels that few commanders could sustain indefinitely. "General, I need to ask about Chun and Mitchell specifically. Are they typical of Guardian Angel operatives?" "Colonel, Chun and Mitchell represent the operational standard we expect from all Guardian Angel personnel. They're intelligent, highly trained, psychologically resilient, and absolutely committed to the mission of bringing American personnel home." The briefing concluded with Webb being given 48 hours to make his decision. The assignment would require him to relocate to a classified facility where he would coordinate operations worldwide, manage a budget that exceeded most military districts, and accept responsibility for missions that could never be publicly acknowledged. That evening, Webb found himself walking through Arlington National Cemetery, thinking about the weight of the decision before him. As he passed the various memorials and headstones, he remembered the ceremony he had attended for Captain Jennifer Hayes, and the quiet dignity with which Alexander Chin had paid her respects to a fellow soldier she had risked everything to recover. His decision was made by the time he reached the tomb of the unknown soldier. The commitment represented by Guardian Angel operations embodied everything Webb believed about military service and the obligations that come with wearing the uniform. 2 weeks later, Webb reported to his new assignment at a facility officially designated as the Joint Personnel Recovery Coordination Center. The building appeared to be a conventional government office complex, but behind its unremarkable facade lay one of the most sophisticated command centers in the American intelligence community. Webb's staff consisted of 12 senior officers and analysts, each specializing in different aspects of personnel recovery operations. They briefed him on 43 active cases involving Guardian Angel operatives deployed across 6 continents, conducting missions ranging from simple remains recovery to complex hostage rescue operations. "Colonel," said Major Lisa Chun, his deputy commander and no relation Alexander Chen, "our current operational tempo is unprecedented. We're managing more active recovery missions than at any time in the program's history." Webb studied the global display that dominated the center's main operations room. Each active mission was represented by a different symbol, with color codes indicating the level of risk and operational complexity. The scope was overwhelming but also inspiring, representing a commitment to American service members that exceeded anything in military history. His first operational decision came within hours of assuming command. An emergency communication from one of their operatives in Somalia indicated that a recovery mission had encountered unexpected complications. The operative, designated Guardian 7, had located the crash site of a military aircraft that had been missing for 3 years, but hostile forces were moving toward the area. "Colonel," Major Chen reported, "Guardian 7 has positive identification on 3 American crew members, but extraction will require immediate support. Current intelligence suggests she has less than 6 hours before enemy forces reach her position." Webb found himself facing exactly the kind of decision that had driven his predecessor to request reassignment. Guardian 7 was operating alone, hundreds of miles from any American military presence, attempting to recover the remains of fellow service members while under direct threat from hostile forces. "What extraction options do we have?" Webb asked his operations staff. "Sir, we can coordinate helicopter support from the USS Essex, currently operating in the Indian Ocean. Flight time to Guardian 7's position would be approximately 4 hours." Webb made his decision quickly, authorizing the extraction operation and coordinating with Naval Aviation to provide support for Guardian 7's mission. The next 4 hours were among the most stressful of his military career, as he monitored communications from an operative he had never met, conducting a mission in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth. The extraction was successful. Guardian 7 and the recovered remains of 3 American aircrew were safely delivered to the USS Essex, concluding a recovery mission that had taken 18 months to plan and execute. Webb's first command decision as director of Guardian Angel operations had honored commitment to leave no one behind while bringing closure to 3 American families. Over the following months, Webb began to understand the full scope of Guardian Angel operations and the extraordinary dedication of the operatives who conducted them. He coordinated recoveries in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and a dozen other countries where American personnel had been lost during military operations. Each mission reinforced his understanding that Guardian Angel operatives represented something unique in American military service. They were volunteers who accepted extraordinary risks not for personal glory or recognition, but out of commitment to fellow service members and their families. 6 months into his command, Webb received a communication that brought his experience full circle. Alexander Chen requested permission to brief him on a new mission that would require his personal authorization due to its unprecedented risk level. When Chen arrived at his facility, Webb was struck by how much she had changed since their first meeting in Afghanistan. She appeared older and carried herself with the accumulated weight of multiple high-risk missions, but her fundamental competence and dedication remained unchanged. "Colonel Webb," Chen said during their private briefing, "I've identified the location of a missing American aircraft in North Korea. The crew of 4 have been listed as missing in action for 2 years, following a reconnaissance mission that was never officially acknowledged." Webb felt his pulse quicken. A recovery mission in North Korea would represent the most challenging operation in Guardian Angel history, requiring months of preparation and coordination with the highest levels of American government. "Ms. Chun," Webb said carefully, "a mission of that nature would require presidential authorization. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny and political sensitivity?" Chen looked at him with the same calm determination he remembered from their first encounter. "Colonel, those 4 Americans have been waiting for 2 years. Their families deserve to know what happened to them. If that requires presidential authorization, then that's what we'll request." Webb spent the next 3 weeks developing a mission proposal that ultimately reached the desk of the President of the United States. The authorization came with conditions that reflected the extraordinary nature of the operation, but it represented the highest level of government commitment to the Guardian Angel mission. Chen's North Korea recovery mission would take 8 months to plan and execute, during which time Webb coordinated with intelligence agencies, diplomatic personnel, and military units across the Pacific theater. The mission's success would depend on Chen's ability to operate undetected in the most heavily fortified nation on Earth, while conducting a recovery operation that could easily trigger an international incident. The mission launch came on a cold morning in October, as Webb watched Chen board a civilian aircraft that would take her on the first leg of journey into territory where discovery meant certain death. As the aircraft disappeared into the dawn sky, Webb understood that he was sending one of America's most valuable operatives on a mission that embodied everything Guardian Angel represented: absolute commitment to fellow service members, regardless of risk or political consequences. 3 months later, Webb received a secure communication that would forever define his understanding of American military service. Chen had successfully located and recovered the remains of all 4 missing aircrew, along with classified equipment that had significant intelligence value. She had accomplished this while operating alone in enemy territory for 83 days, using cover identities and survival skills that enabled her to complete one of the most challenging recovery missions in military history. The recovered aircrew were returned to their families with full military honors, officially listed as having been found through diplomatic negotiations rather than recovery operations that could never be publicly acknowledged. Chen's role in their return would forever remain classified, but Webb would carry the memory of her service as a reminder of the extraordinary dedication that defines American military commitment. As Webb approached his 2nd anniversary as Guardian Angel Commander, he reflected on the 47 successful recovery missions his operatives had completed under his leadership. Each mission had brought American service members home to their families, honored the commitment that no one gets left behind, and demonstrated the dedication of operatives who risk everything for fellow Americans they may never meet. Standing in his operations center, watching the global display that tracked Guardian Angel missions worldwide, Webb understood that he had found his purpose in American military service. The quiet heroism of operatives like Alexandra Chun and Sarah Mitchell represented everything noble about military commitment, conducted without recognition or public acclaim, but with absolute dedication to fellow service members and their families. The phone on his desk rang with an incoming priority communication from the field. Another Guardian Angel operative was requesting extraction support following a successful recovery mission in Syria. Webb accepted the call, ready to coordinate whatever resources were necessary to bring another American hero safely home. Because that's what Guardian Angel operations represented: the unshakable commitment that no American service member will ever be forgotten, no matter where they fall, no matter how long it takes to find them, and no matter what risks are required to bring them home to the families who love them and the nation they serve with honor. Some stories end with parades and medals. Others end with quiet ceremonies attended only by family members who finally have answers about their loved ones. Guardian Angel operations ensure that every American service member receives the honor they deserve, even if the heroes who make it possible will never be publicly recognized for their extraordinary service and sacrifice. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb had found his calling in supporting those quiet heroes, and in ensuring that America's commitment to its service members remains absolute, regardless of the cost or complexity involved in keeping that sacred promise. Have you ever wondered about the Americans who never made it home from distant battlefields? Have you considered the families who wait for news that may never come through official channels? Guardian Angel operatives like Alexander Chun and Sarah Mitchell represent America's unbreakable promise that every service member matters, every sacrifice will be honored, and no one will ever be forgotten or left behind. Their names may never appear in history books, their missions may never be declassified, but their service embodies everything noble about American military commitment. They are the quiet guardians who ensure that our nation's promise to those who serve is kept, regardless of the personal cost or professional risk involved. Subscribe to Those Who Left a Trace if you believe these stories of quiet heroism deserve to be remembered. Share this video to honor the service of those who risk everything to bring our people home. And remember that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are performed by people whose names we'll never know, but whose service makes us all safer and honors the best traditions of American military dedication. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll continue to share the account of extraordinary service and sacrifice that remind us what true heroism really means. Until then, remember that freedom isn't free, and those who ensure our liberty often serve in silence, without recognition, but with absolute dedication to their fellow Americans and the values we hold dear.